On the night of the 28th of August 2023, Amamudin Alikhel left a friend's house in Erith and started walking home. He never got there. 3 years later, 2 men would be sentenced for his manslaughter, but neither of them struck the blow that killed him. No weapon was used on him at all. Erith is the far eastern edge of London, on the south bank of the Thames, at the point where the city gives up and becomes Kent. Lower Road runs through the middle of it, and buses run along Lower Road all evening, every evening, including that one. It started with a phone call. Alikhel had been drinking that evening with a friend, a man named Helmandi. Both men were Afghan. Alikhel appears in the official record twice under 2 names, because the paperwork could not settle on one. His family was 4,000 miles away in Afghanistan and stayed there. Everything they would ever know about that night was going to have to reach them. Just before 10, the 2 of them left the house together and set off along West Street, then turned into Lower Road. It was an ordinary night. Buses ran along the road at their usual intervals. Cars passed. Neither man had any reason to expect trouble. Coming the other way was a 39-year-old local man named Pearce. He was 100 meters from his own front door. Behind him, 21 appearances in court, 64 offenses, and then 10 years of nothing at all. He was carrying shopping bags in one hand and his phone in another, talking on the phone to his daughter. The 3 men, 2 strangers walking one way, one walking the other, crossed paths and exchanged a few words. CCTV captured the moment. There's nothing in the footage to suggest what's about to happen. Alikhel and Helmandi carried on walking in the direction they'd already been heading. Pearce carried on the other way, toward his home, 100 meters down the same road. The call to his daughter didn't end there. She rang his son's girlfriend. Word reached Pearce's 17-year-old son, Markie Collins, who was in a house nearby. Collins was 17 years old and had never been convicted of anything in his life. He was indoors, 1 street over, when the call came through. He was on the road within seconds. Within moments, Pearce was running back the way he'd come, no longer carrying shopping, but a long piece of wood he'd picked up along the way. Collins ran out to join him from a side street, arriving within seconds of his father reaching the 2 men. Nothing had broken out on that pavement. The first encounter was over. Both sides had walked away from it, in opposite directions, and for a short while the road was quiet. Everything that followed required somebody to turn around. Lasted about 30 seconds. Both Alikhel and Helmandi were knocked to the ground. Collins pulled Helmandi away by his legs. Helmandi got back up and began remonstrating with the 2 of them. Alikhel didn't get up. He was struck while on the ground and left motionless in the middle of the carriageway, the offside lane of Lower Road, at night. 2 cars passed and swerved to avoid him. Neither Pearce nor Collins, nor the 2 unidentified women who'd arrived and later left with them, made any attempt to move him to safety. Then a bus came through, driven by a woman named Gwen Quinn. She had been driving toward that stretch of road for several minutes, through an evening in which nothing whatsoever had happened to her. She saw Pearce and Helmandi still arguing at the roadside and steered further into the center of the carriageway to keep clear of them. As she did, Alikhel began to sit up. The bus struck him. His body was dragged for 60 to 80 meters. Emergency services were called by someone at the scene. Alikhel was pronounced dead at the scene at 11:10. Pearce and Collins walked away without helping him, going into a side street where the wood was later found discarded in a bush. They were arrested and interviewed 2 weeks later on the 12th of September 2023. Pearce gave a prepared statement claiming he'd been defending himself, then answered no comment to everything else. Collins answered no comment throughout. It would be another year before they were formally charged and brought before Bromley Magistrates' Court, then sent up to the Old Bailey. Both entered not guilty pleas at their first Crown Court hearing. The case didn't go to trial in the way that the plea suggested it would. On the first day in February 2026, Pearce changed his plea. He admitted the unlawful killing of Alikhel, charged as manslaughter, and admitted assaulting Helmandi. Collins admitted assaulting both men. The joint manslaughter charge against Collins was left on file, remaining on the record but not pursued further while the guilty pleas stood. At sentencing, the central legal question wasn't who threw the blow that killed Alikhel. Nobody disputed that. It was whether Pearce could be held responsible for a death caused, in the most direct physical sense, by a bus. The judge's answer turned on a principle that stood for decades. If you unlawfully create a dangerous situation, like knocking someone unconscious and leaving them in the road, You remain responsible for what happens next unless something entirely separate and unforeseeable breaks the chain. A bus driver failing to see an incapacitated man in its path, the judge found, wasn't separate or unforeseeable. It was exactly the danger Pearce had created. Pearce's own account, given later, was that the two men had approached him to buy drugs, a claim he first raised in a signed statement in February 2025, more than a year after his no-comment interview. His barrister acknowledged it wouldn't change the sentence either way, and the point was set aside. The CCTV made a formal fact-finding hearing unnecessary. Several of Pearce's other claims were rejected outright, that he'd acted in self-defense, that he hadn't realized how badly hurt Alikhel was, and that he'd told Helmandi to fetch his friend and go home. Read out at the hearing, the pre-sentence report described Pearce's actions as driven by an inflated sense of pride and an unwillingness to back down, an assessment the court agreed with. Helmandi's own account carried a complication. His victim personal statement, given in February 2026, differed in places from the one he gave 3 days after the attack in 2023. This includes a reference to racism that the prosecution asked the court to set aside for sentencing purposes. The court set it aside for sentencing, making no finding either way. Pearce had a long record. 21 court appearances covering 64 offenses, including a firearms certificate conviction from 2015, though nothing in the past decade. The judge weighed that history against genuine mitigation, Pearce's care for his elderly father, 5 years free of alcohol, and remorse the judge accepted as sincere if very late. The starting point for the offense was 9 years. Aggravating and mitigating factors were found to balance out, and the sentence was held at 10 years, reduced to 8 years and 3 months for the guilty plea. Collins was 17 at the time, with no previous convictions. Sentencing guidelines for offenders, his age at the time of the offense, meant the court's options were narrower than they'd be for an adult committing the same acts today. The judge accepted Collins had acted out of loyalty to his father, rather than any independent decision to cause harm, and noted how much had changed for him in the 2.5 years since: a partner, a young child, a job. He received 7 months, suspended for 18 months with unpaid work and supervision attached. Alikhel's family gave a statement describing a loss that reached beyond his mother and immediate relatives. The empty chair at gatherings, the disrupted sleep, the financial strain that followed losing him. The judge had granted the family permission to listen to the sentencing remotely from Afghanistan. The connection failed. They were sent a written transcript instead once it was ready. The legal question in this case had an answer. Pearce created the danger, and the law held him to it, regardless of who or what delivered the final blow. What's left unresolved is smaller and harder to fix with a sentence. A family that couldn't even hear the moment their son's case ended because a phone line from thousands of miles away didn't connect. If you want to follow how cases like this are handled once sentencing is passed, including whether the charge left on file against Collins ever resurfaces,